this particular legend, one of which is Llyn Ogwen, which it's a pretty small lake. It's right back here, but there's another one that Richard took me to on our Snowdonia tour. So the story with Llyn Ogwen in particular is that in Arthur's final battle, which I think is called the Battle of Camlan, he is mortally wounded. So one of his knights, Sir Bedwyr, takes his magical sword Excalibur and tosses it into Llyn Ogwen. Whereupon the Lady of the Lake emerges it and grabs the sword and ends up taking it back to Avalon, where she had actually had it forged in the first place before bequeathing it to Arthur. And I mean, it's totally, like, I wish that I could have been there when it was misty, because I'm sure it would not be a stretch to imagine being able just to walk into the midst of the lake and go into this otherworldly realm. It's just like, it's just so beautiful. I just love that. So my final gal pal that I'm going to talk about, her name is Bronwen, and she's the Dryad of Bulach Fastilion. So after visiting the Halford estate, Richard took me on a tour of the backcountry in the Cambrian Mountains. On this part of the tour, we came upon what I came to refer to as the wise old wild apple tree of Bulach Fastilion. And there she is in all of her glory. And Bulach Fastilion is an old farm, and there's actually like the ruins of a farmhouse sort of down the road and on the left. So when I came upon this tree, I really just wanted to lay down underneath it and just drift off with the fairies, or the Tulach Teg, as they are called in Welsh. That's Welsh for fair family. And apparently this desire that I had was quite common for people at one time. It's like people would be out on a walk, and they would hear beautiful music being played, so they would sort of stray from their path to find the music. And eventually they would get really tired, and they would usually fall asleep somewhere, and it was usually under a tree, or at least a lot of times. And what happened is they would be put under a fairy enchantment when they fell asleep. And then oftentimes when they came out of the enchantment, a very long amount of time would have passed. Like, in their mind, they would have only been asleep for 4 hours, but sometimes like even years would have passed. So when I started making Bronwen, she actually started out being a fairy, and I knew she had to have red hair because she belonged to an apple tree, right? But along the way somewhere, it became more fitting to me that she should be a dryad, which is another nymph from Greek mythology, only instead of belonging to freshwater, they belong to trees. And Bron means raven, and Welsh Bronwen means fair raven. And I didn't really see any ravens on my trip, but it just seems like a fitting name. But something that is interesting with ravens that I found out when I was reading the Mabinogi is that apparently at that time, warriors were sometimes referred to as ravens, which was very interesting to me. Like, I had no idea. There's some very powerful battles that take place that are, supposed to be taking place between like two warring tribes of humans, but one of them will be talked about as if they're ravens. So found that out from reading the footnotes. So for my final slide, I am going to be talking about corpse candles, which are omens of death in Welsh folklore. They were said to be lights that issued forth from the bodies of people who were close to death, usually from the nostrils. These lights would then travel down the road and congregate in the cemetery where this person that was going to die soon was going to be buried. It was not uncommon, apparently, for people to see groups of them at night, or so they say, traveling along these old corpse roads as though it was like a phantom funeral procession. So I became pretty into this idea. And actually this picture On the left is a very quick ink study that I did that I'm calling Corpse Candle. It was actually, I would do these like very quick ink studies in the morning to get warmed up. And I made this particular one after reading a story in the Welsh fairy book that I bought to prepare myself, that along with Caribbean folktales that I referenced earlier. And I read a story called Striking a Corpse Candle, and I was really, really into it. And it wasn't intentional, this little piece, but it just came out looking like a corpse candle to me. And this idea of corpse candles also inspired me to actually start playing with like drawing with flames on paper, matches rather, I should say. And that's actually how I created another piece in the show called Ashes on the Doorstep, and that particular piece is in reference to another story in the Welsh fairy book. It was actually the first story that I read in that book. I think it was actually the first Welsh, specifically fairy tale that I read, but anyway, it's called Robin's Return, and it's about a man who goes out on a walk, and he falls asleep under a tree, and is put under a fairy enchantment, like I was talking about earlier. When he wakes up, the beautiful tree that he had fallen asleep on has since died, so many, many years had passed. And actually, when he hit the doorstep of his old farmhouse, he immediately turned to ashes, which was just like really hit me. It was very powerful to me for whatever reason. So I really like latched on to that in particular. So on an end note, and unfortunately, while we're talking about death, I actually left Wales on March 7th, 2020, and only a few days later, borders, like country borders, were closed down due to COVID. So it was pretty like wild timing. So between the storm I blew in on and when I got home and all my adventures, which of course not all of them can fit into this presentation, I just felt like I had a very magical time. And it actually worked out really well for me because I felt like I could really absorb everything and let it really seep in over the course of the pandemic. And I continue to too, obviously. So that's pretty much it. Does anyone have any questions or comments, or I hope I didn't bore anyone too badly, but
You all want to go to Wales with you now.
oh, good, yay!
Tell Richard to get a bigger van.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
That was terrific.
Oh,
Thank you.
thank you.
What was the weather like? Because it looks like it was nice. Like
Yeah, I mean, aside from that, so there was the first storm that I talked about. That was storm. I think it was Kiara, and then actually, I remembered this when I was researching it. The next weekend, and again, I had forgotten about this. There was another really large storm that actually hit Wales too, that brought even more rain. And during a point, actually the second week at the residency, Rose and her family left to go visit family in England, so I was by myself, but when they came back, they actually showed me pictures that they were canoeing with their daughter in a place that was like a field. It was so flooded that they could literally canoe. So, but other than that, the weather was actually pretty nice.
so it wasn't freezing, because you think of England as being cold.
Yeah. I mean, it was cold. I was definitely like bundled up, but it wasn't, really wasn't that bad. I felt prepared, really. So, hi.
I loved it, fantastic, good photography, and very poetically delivered. I had a question, and this is just dork stuff. I forget the name of the knight who sliced that snake for the benefit of the lion. Owain?
Owain, yeah,
Okay.
totally.
Was the white lion meant to symbolize England too, and Wales helping them out like the dragon?
Yeah,
Or-
I don't know.
Okay.
I kind of had that thought too. I don't remember reading any like footnotes about that, like in the back of the book or anything. But yeah, I had that, I kind of was like, does this white line symbolize something? Because it kind of like seems like it would, but I don't know.
Cool. Thank you. Is that a dragon you caught yourself?
Yes, it is.
Marianne, come over to the house. It's living in Amelia's room.
Awesome. Where'd you go? That's awesome.